Hello, welcome to ARonAR. I'm Adam Rose, and today I'm going to be talking about lessons learned at the recent Adventure Racing World Championships held in South Africa in 2023 down in the Kocha. Usually when I do these kind of post-race analysis videos, it's from the perspective of a dot watcher or somebody sitting on the couch watching the race unfold. This time, however, it's from the perspective of a racer because, of course, I took part in the event. It was incredible. And as with pretty much every expedition race, I took away some lessons, some tips, some ideas, some new things that I learned. And I'm hoping this is going to be useful for you, even if you are an experienced expedition racer, but then also, of course, and especially for the new racers who haven't maybe done an expedition race before and, maybe a little bit nervous, then this will give you some ideas on how you can prepare for a race of that magnitude. Okay, also, this is going to be part one, because there's a lot of ground to cover, and if I put it into one episode, it becomes huge. So, 2 for the price of 1. Okay, the topic of hygiene. Now, this is a big deal in expedition racing. If you don't take care of your hygiene, you're likely to suffer for it and get sick and have all sorts of issues, infections and things, and that can be race ending. It absolutely can. And in this particular event, a lot of people got sick, which is kind of unusual. And whether that was down to hygiene practices or not, the point is, what can we do to stay healthy? So there was a stage, a single paddling stage in this expedition race, 60 kilometers down a river. And the race director, Stefan Muller, had told us, be very careful about not drinking the water, whether drinking, intentionally, as in taking bottles of water and putting some tablets and taking a drink. He said, don't even do that. And then there's the possibility of accidentally drinking water. That kayaking stage was one of the best I've ever done in an expedition race because it was exciting. There were rapids, not very severe rapids, but it kept you on your toes. And most teams, I think, fell in. Now, it's very easy to, when you fall into water like this, to take a gulp of water, and then that causes problems. We had been warned by Stefan that upriver from the kayak put-in was an urban settlement, and of course there's runoff from a place like that, and you don't want to be drinking water downstream from a town or anything. In my team, 4 members in the team, one of us got sick, but that wasn't quite the same as most teams. Why? This teammate had actually gotten sick as soon as he arrived in South Africa. So maybe there was something in the water, maybe something in the food. His body just had to acclimatize as he was arriving in South Africa from overseas. We had come from the UK. And you get those kind of teething issues sometimes with some teams. So he had runny tummy, vomiting. And then the morning of the race itself, he had woken up. We got to get on a bus and go to the start line. He was feeling so sick he didn't even want to get out of bed. He was just like, leave me, leave me, leave me. But we managed to convince him, and all credit to him. He was there on the start line and actually succeeded. So he completed the first 740 kilometers of what turned out to be the longest race I've ever done, absolutely. And for most teams, I think that was also the longest race they'd ever done. Before the tummy bug came back, and at that point he decided, look, my body's had enough, it's gone into rebellion, and he pulled out. A lot of other teams, I saw many teams who, whether they crossed the finishing line or not, people were getting very, very sick, vomiting, diarrhea, and trying to push their way through the race. So being very careful about our water sources and water treatment was essential. Although strictly speaking, we only treated water twice in the whole 8 or so days that we were out on the course. The rest of the time we were just very, very careful about where we sourced our water. So Stefan had said, for example, we had to get water from windmills or sheep troughs. And of course you had to be careful not to just drink water straight out of them, or to get water from the outflow of a water trough. We were always careful to get it at the inflow, which is still clean water. So for 3 of us, we never got sick at any point. There was also the complication by the fact that my teammate had been so sick at the start of the race. I was very careful in sharing my food with him. Now, it's very common when you have, food in your pack, you take it out and you share it with your teammates, either because you've got it out already and you say, hey, do you want some? Just to share. Or because you're bored of your own food. So if you share with them, your teammates will share with you, and it's just a kind of a better experience all around, so you don't suffer from food boredom. And I was very, very conscious of the fact that my teammate, because he had been suffering from this bug, he could easily, for example, have wiped his mouth and then put his hand into my food pack to grab some nuts or sweets or whatever it was. So I was very, very careful to give him food from my food bag into his hand, but not permit him to put his hand into my food. I didn't want to risk the chance of contamination. And after 2-3 days, I was kind of, look, he's looking fine, he's looking strong. And so then I relaxed. So there was no chance of me picking up whatever bug he had suffered from. So also things like always using hand gel whenever you go to the toilet, making sure your hands are absolutely clean afterwards. Carrying Imodium, enough Imodium, and that is an anti-diarrheal, so that you can, if things really do get bad, you can try and take care of things and not suffer too much as you continue through the course. So hygiene is essential, and that'll affect everything that you do in the race. This race was unusual in that every team was given 2 sets of maps. That's not normal. Usually it's just 1 set of maps. But the bigger deal was, rather than the maps having the checkpoints printed on the maps, we had to copy them off a master map. So for every stage, you'd receive the maps just for that particular stage. You'd take these over to the master set of maps that did have the checkpoints printed on them, and then you'd copy those down or transfer them onto your local set of maps. Expedition Africa has always followed this practice. And now, having done it, I actually like it because, well, for many reasons. One is we don't know what the full course is going to be. We discover it as we go through the course. And I love that idea, which is, the adventure aspect of an expedition race, rather than having it all mapped out beforehand. Secondly, there was less burden, because rather than having to prepare the whole course, I could just focus on the particular stage that we were dealing with. And that meant, for example, the night before the race, as a team, we weren't sitting there the whole night looking at maps, trying to plot things out, trying to worry about things. We could just, in fact, sleep. We didn't have to concern ourselves with the maps at all, because we received them just an hour or so before the actual start of the race. In the Adventure Racing World Championships in Spain in 2021, it was completely the opposite. Each team was given a set of maps, and in our case, we chose a second set. We were given these maps literally an hour before the start, but in this case, each set of maps was the equivalent of 50 A3 pages with pre-printed checkpoints. So we had 2 sets of 50 maps. We had 100 A3 pages, and that was for the entire course. So in that first hour before the start, we were frantically trying to scratch out that route, mark it with marker pens and all that kind of stuff. We ran out of time, as every team would have done, and then we had to carry all that paper for the entire opening stage, which was 120 kilometers of trekking. I mean, a long way. That's a lot of paper. From the second stage onwards, we're able to, decant some of those maps into bite boxes or transition boxes. But it was a concern and it was an issue. And the way they did it at Kocha in South Africa was much more relaxing, much less of a burden. The challenge lay in when you copy the checkpoints from that master map onto your first set of maps, let's say the primary set, if you want to call it that, you could easily make a mistake, especially if you're tired, sleep deprived, and you're just trying to concentrate and get them down. So the tip here is, when we had to put the checkpoints on the second set of maps, we didn't copy from the primary set. We went to the master maps. And that way you have 2 sets of maps, both getting their checkpoints off the master set. There was far less chance of errors creeping in. As you can understand, if you copy incorrectly to the primary set and then transfer that to the secondary set, you have no idea you've made a mistake. But if they're both copied off the original source, off the master set, you can go, hang on a second, these don't agree, and then you could correct according to that. Another tip, while we're on the subject of maps, is write the checkpoint descriptions directly onto your maps, off the rule book or the checkpoint description list that you have. And that way, when you get to the checkpoint, you can see what it is described there right on the maps, and you don't have to look for the rule book in order to verify what it is the team's looking for. In terms of navigation, this wasn't the trickiest of courses to navigate. In our case, in our team, we found it fairly straightforward, and that was because Stefan had used the checkpoints more as waypoints to indicate a desired route, rather than making the checkpoints, difficult in their own right, that you had to really hunt for each one. Now, I did hear after the race finished that some teams had struggled with a few checkpoints. To be fair, we struggled with the first trig beacon, which was at the highest point of the race, the longest trekking stage, which was stage number 3, if I remember correctly. And there was a reason for us struggling, not simply that the checkpoint was maybe a bit difficult, but because it happened during the worst weather of the entire race. A storm came through, there was incredible rain, wind, freezing temperatures, the top of a mountain, it's exposed.
That was one of the harshest checkpoints I've ever got. The weather is foul.
And so we found it, but if you look on our tracker, that's the one place where we had a bit of a hiccup, but we were able to sort it out and deal well with the rest of the course. One of the reasons I think that we did fairly well at the navigation is because we had 4 navigators in our team. I appreciate that's not going to be the case with most teams, but it just turned out that way, and it was really, really beneficial. So the more people in your team who can navigate, the better. Not only does the primary navigator have somebody to verify their navigation with a secondary navigator, but we had 2 sets of those. So for every leg, it was very easy to say, oh, I'll navigate for this one, I'll navigate for that one, all that kind of stuff. So the more navigators, the better. And if you only have one navigator, it's still worth having a second set of eyes. And that way, maybe the second person, functioning in a backup sense, can learn how to navigate by watching the primary one. So always have at least 2 sets of eyes on the maps if you can. Always ask for 2 sets of maps if you can. Taking racing seriously. What do I mean? Well, of course, the podium level teams or the top 10 teams are going to be pushing harder than the rest of the pack to try and achieve the highest position possible. But for the mid-pack and rear pack, and I find myself somewhere in there, it's quite easy sometimes to forget about racing. You might be just pacing yourself, good, so that you don't fall apart, but you always got to keep at the back of your mind, in your peripheral vision, the fact that you are racing. So don't take it too slow, don't take it too easy, because what might happen is that you might be timed out. You might fall foul of a cutoff so that you can no longer do all the stages you wanted to do, or in some events, I've even seen very big expedition races where if you didn't reach the end of the first stage in time, not only were you cut off, but that's the end of your race. Literally, sorry, go home. You can't continue on to the second stage and so on. So always keep the pressure on. Always keep your foot on the accelerator, no matter what your rank is, no matter if you, of course, at the front, but if you're in the middle, at the back, always keep racing on there. Don't go too easy. Don't be too relaxed. Keep on pushing, 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 because you never know what's going to happen. The curveballs that might hit you, just like the weather hit this race. The pressure of racing will also help you overcome discomfort or pain or suffering, because the goal is all about the race and not simply how I'm feeling. And I saw this with some of the teams who got really sick, but then persevered. And by the time they crossed the finishing line, they had overcome all their tummy troubles, vomiting, diarrhea, and things like that, and managed to push through. So always keep racing somewhere in your vision. Pacing yourself is critical in a long expedition race. And this race took longer than certainly my team expected. Although the race course was open for 9 days, everybody had expected the overall course length to be about 750 kilometers. And then 2 days before the start, Stefan Muller had told us, no, actually, it's probably closer to 850 kilometers. That's a little bit longer. And then in terms of my team, and we navigated fairly well, by the time it finished, we had covered 980 kilometers. So that's 200 kilometers more than we had expected. Now, that affected our decisions. So the very, very first stage was a difficult trek across sand dunes, part of it, down to a beach, and then a long trek along the beach, which is mind-numbing and tiring. And then that was followed by 2 river crossings in the middle of the night in our case. And cold water, or just jumping into any water after hard exertion, can sap your energy. So when we reached the first transition, I think a lot of teams, having just crossed the river, they're cold, they're drenched, they're just coming out of the water, got warm as quickly as possible, jumped on their bicycles and started the next mountain biking stage. Instead, as a team, we got ourselves ready and jumped into our sleeping bags. So we slept for maybe 1.5 to 2 hours on the first night of the race. And that's very unusual for a long expedition race. Most teams will want to sleep at least not for the first 24 hours. So try and not sleep for maybe 30 hours, 36 hours before they contemplate taking a rest. But having taken a rest on the first night, it meant we started that mountain biking stage, which had a lot of uphill, with enough energy in our tanks to give it a good bash. And then we proceeded to do that throughout the race. Almost every transition, we took a break of roughly 2 hours, some cases a bit longer than that. And the extra sleep we took was on the course itself. So 10-minute, 15-minute, half an hour stops just by the side of the road, sleeping in riverbeds, sleeping under a bush, resting under a tree. And combined, that meant we were able to push through and not fall apart. So, pacing yourself and not pushing yourself too hard, but consistency. So we didn't burn out too quickly. And as a consequence, we acquitted ourselves fairly well and crossed that finishing line, at least 3 of us, because we didn't get sick and didn't fall apart mentally either. So for such a long race, I never experienced sleep monsters. Taking care of your feet. Now, this is a tired subject. I've done videos on it before, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's actually pretty ridiculous to be still bringing up this topic again and again and again. If you've done a few expedition races, you really should have enough experience to prevent foot problems becoming an issue at all. Now in this race it was a little bit more difficult, maybe a little bit more challenging, because that first stage included trekking over sand dunes and then along that beach, which meant sand could get into your shoes. And the very last stage again featured trekking across sand dunes. Now all you have to do is be meticulous. As a team, we took off our socks and shoes and removed every grain of sand that we could see. And then in that last stage again, we were doing the same thing, and all the other trekking stages. Now, some of the teams have a protocol in place, in fact. For example, Bend Racing, which is arguably one of the best, if not the best, North American team, they've instituted a protocol recently in that they stop every 6 hours, regardless of what condition their feet are in, and then as a team, they take care of their feet. They moisturize them, remove any debris, just make sure there are no blisters looming or anything like that. And then they get through the course without any issues whatsoever. I completed that race, my feet looked totally fine, I could move on and do another race in theory. And yet I saw other teams with people who have so much experience, their feet in tatters by the end. That really shouldn't have happened, and pretty much I'd say there's no excuse for it. It isn't rocket science. Just follow the steps and your feet will be fine. In terms of taking care of your feet, of course, you need to make sure that your foot lubrication is near to hand. So in my pack straps, I have little pockets, and I either have it there or in the hip pockets, so I can get it out easily without even having to take my pack off my back. That way, I will get the job done and I won't procrastinate or postpone dealing with it and using it where it's necessary. Knowing how to read a map without a compass is a skill, and it's something you should learn. If you didn't know this already, when you travel around the world to different adventure races, you can't simply use one compass or set of compasses everywhere. And that's because the amount the compass needle is affected varies from region to region. So coming from the UK, as a team, we were supposed to get a compass that is balanced for the southern hemisphere. And we didn't do that. So we raced 980 odd kilometers with compasses from the UK. Our rationale was kind of, well, do we really want to get compasses that we might never use again? Because we don't normally race in the southern hemisphere. And that might sound like we're being cheap, but hey. And then also, the problem emerges in that the needle, if you take a southern hemisphere compass or a northern hemisphere compass to a different region, the needle can stick. So we were holding our northern hemisphere compasses at an angle. So there's the base plate, we were tilting it, and the compass was kind of working. I will admit that at the start line, I really wished I had made the effort. But we navigated the whole course without issue, other than that trig beacon in the beginning of the long foot stage. How is that possible? Well, we used terrain recognition. The fact that we had 4 skilled navigators obviously helped, but terrain recognition is a skill you really want to develop, and sometimes you have to use that skill regardless of your compass, because if there's iron ore in the area, it can cause your compass to spin in the wrong direction. And sometimes people have their compass polarity reversed for whatever reason, and then they can't use their compass. So you need to be able to look at the terrain, identify it, and then find it on the map. And we did, as I say, the whole race like that. So I won't recommend going without the right compass, but you should be able to navigate without a compass, because you never know if you might encounter that issue in the race itself. Okay, so that's all we have time for today. Of course, I hope this has been beneficial for you. And if you have any other tips and tricks, maybe you learned them at the World Championships or any other adventure race, you can pop that down in the comments to help grow the pool of knowledge, the pool of ideas on how best to get through, what could be the toughest challenge of your relatively comfortable first world life. It's true, it's true. These are contrived circumstances. All right. I will see you on the next one. Thank you.